Hello, it's Jack Tutor here of Attention Magazine. Welcome to Crucial Listening, the podcast where I speak with musicians and sound artists about 3 albums that are important to them. My guest this time is Cremation Lily, the project of Zen Shigo. The new Cremation Lily record, Dreams Drenched in Static, is out now on the Flenser. It's an absolute beaut. Zen has a strong affinity with screamo and wielding tape as well, and all the possibilities within that, along with electronics and boundless array of textures. Really, what you realise with this record after being hit in the face by the enormity of the sound is that everything's a composite of different experiences, different fidelities. You have some highly eroded tape on this record, which then treats in ways such as tying tapes to the end of the pier. You have vocals recorded on the train, various different experiences and memories all congealed into something that feels really explosively unified. It's a blinder of a record, and the Flenser's a great label too. It's a good pairing. So head over to cremationlily.bandcamp.com to hear it, and a bunch of other Cremation Lily releases. I'll of course include a load of links in the show notes concerning Zen's picks and the new record too. And if you want to support the podcast, you can head over to ko-fi.com/crucial listening. You can donate one-off or monthly in order to help support the fees associated and energy exerted in running the show. Thank you so much for your support there and for listening too. Greatly appreciated. Really hope you enjoy this one. I definitely did. This is Cremation Lily on Crucial Listening. Hello Zen, welcome to Crucial Listening.
Hey.
Thank you for coming on the podcast. We're going to talk about your 3 important records. I want to start first with Dreams Drenched in Static, which is your new album that's come out on the Flenser. I mean, firstly, I saw actually earlier today that just recently you did a listen through and a commentary on Ampled. How was that? I find that such an interesting idea and an interesting thing for you to be doing. So what was it like?
So I actually hadn't listened to the new record since I'd been listening to it for like approving the test presses.
Oh wow.
So that was the first time I'd properly gone through, sat down and listened front to back to the record. So it was definitely interesting, and it was I didn't do any edits or anything. It's just like 30 minutes unedited of me listening to the record. So it's definitely it was interesting. I kind of got absorbed in the record a little bit more than I thought I would, and it kind of affected me a little bit more than I thought it would. But
right,
yeah, it was really interesting actually. And the things that I picked out were, I went into it thinking that I would talk about certain things, and I absolutely did not. I got completely distracted with other stuff I was noticing on the record.
I mean, how was that affected your relationship with it, or your outlook on the record? I guess confronting it after that long must have been.
Yeah, it's definitely it's quite a painful record to listen back to, because it is so tied to last year when it was recorded. That it was quite a difficult year, for the world at large, and personally for me as well. And the record's so tied into that, and so many of the memories of the record and even the sound sources of the record were recorded throughout that period. Voice notes, voice notes on trains to the other side of the country and stuff like that. They all kind of made it onto the record. So it really is this immediate kind of transportation for me back to that time.
Vocals, actually, I wanted to bring up because I've heard you talk about the fact that this has got your voice on it more to, I guess, not plug the gaps, but occupy the space that I guess would have been otherwise occupied by other aspects of what you do. I mean, what was it like recording vocals for this one? Did you approach it differently or feel differently about it for this record compared to the other stuff you've done?
Yeah, I think this was the first one where vocals were part of writing the songs, kind of from the very beginning. Previously, almost all the time when I've done vocals, they've been like I'll have written an instrumental piece and then vocals will either fit or they won't. Whereas the songs on Dreams Drenched in Static were all written with vocals in mind from the start. The tracks that do have vocals and the ones that don't, they weren't intended to be there, with a couple of exceptions. So it definitely, the vocals and the lyrics especially feel more integral to the record. And as well, listening back to the 3 records that I picked for this podcast, it was quite interesting in that I think they kind of represent my approach to vocals pretty closely. And I can see where I got a lot of influence. I kind of just picked these records without thinking about it too much. I just wanted to go with just ones that felt important to me for whatever reason, and then I could kind of figure out why they were important to me through listening back to them.
You say that vocals were there at the start. I mean, that's something that goes through my head when I'm listening to this record, which is that because it's such a overwhelming splay of sound, and obviously the melodies are coming through really strong, but it's not always obvious to discern how you may have even started, because there's not like even your voice is kind of coming in all different directions. It's not like a central focal point. Everything is whirling around. So I mean, or I don't know if this is consistent across the record, but what tended to be the first elements, along with voice, that acted as your way into these pieces? Definitely
most of the tracks, something like the title track or Wavering Blood or I'm Done, like most of the tracks with vocals on the record started with a sampler that I was using as a drum machine, a string of pedals, some tape loops and vocals. It was the original demos for each track were super simple and pretty stripped back, and then as the record progressed, I started to take some of those, and as I re-recorded elements and as the songs became a bit more fleshed out and became more of this whirling mass, I began to take some of those original elements and then warping those and stretching those and incorporating some of that, some of the original demos into the final tracks, and kind of gives it this through line from the beginning to the end. The building blocks of the track are sort of still there at the end. You can see the stitches a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the kind of opposite end of the spectrum is because it is so wonderfully saturated, and yet there's loads of very, very specific details that also protrude at the same time. It's so obvious. I mean, when I did it on speakers to begin with, I think what I'm really connecting with this record is that it's just a real powerhouse over speakers, but then over headphones, all the cassette plosives and everything, those little kinks and crinkles really come through. So how did you know when to stop with each track? Because there's so much.
That is, I've been thinking about that recently, actually, because so I don't know if I've spoken about this with anyone, but I had I set myself a end date that I wanted the record to be done by last year, and I went over it by a few months, and that was primarily because I had a load of shit going on and family stuff, but also because I didn't know when it was done. There was times when I would sit on a song and I'd be like, okay, well, this feels like it just doesn't feel right. There's something missing.
Mm.
And for me, I was thinking about this recently because I'm working on starting new material at the moment and sort of digging into some collaborative projects. And it really is just a feeling. I just kind of, if something isn't done, then it just niggles at me and feels like it isn't done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It'll come back to haunt me. I might feel like it's done, but a week later it'll be there niggling in the back of my head. So they're just done when I can stop thinking about them, really.
Oh, right. Wow, there just becomes a moment where you're like, okay, that's not haunting my thoughts. Like that must feel complete. Wow. Okay, that's so interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the project, definitely. Collaborative work is sometimes more dictated by time limits or by, different limits through the collaborative process. But for solo stuff, if I don't have like a strict time limit, I'll just kind of keep listening and keep sitting on things until they feel right.
One other question here I wanted to touch on is your beats, because they sit so nicely. Again, there's so, like I said countless times now, there's so much going on, and yet the beats, they're really embedded within it, right? They feel really intrinsically tied to everything. Was there a different approach that you put into practice here, or do you feel like that you went new places with the way that you were constructing the rhythm aspect of these pieces?
Yeah, the rhythm actually was like something like the title track. That was one of the first songs that I started and one of the first songs that I demoed for the record, and definitely a track that I've had in mind for a good few years now. And I just always had this idea of this like really pounding, just industrial drum machine mixed with shoegaze and screamo, and it was this influence from different genres of music that kind of influenced the rhythms on the album more so. Whereas before I was always kind of I was often stuck within looping a lot more. And this album has more variation as it goes on because I used a sampler for the last couple of Cremation Lily recordings. I've used a Roland sampler for the drum machine, so I kind of, as I've been figuring out how to use that as well, the beats have become a bit more non-linear and a bit more complex as well. So I was able to give more focus to rhythm and percussion on these songs.
Well, I could ask about all aspects of this record. I think it's one that just invites so much curiosity around process, but
yeah, there's a lot of stories to be told about the just the little things that are on the record. But
yeah, for sure. I mean, people should definitely check out the record and I guess formulate their own questions, and it's so lovely. So I'm going to put a link in the show notes. People should 100% check it out. Like I say, it's on the Flenser. But then let's go to your important records now. And before I get to the records specifically, I'd like to ask about how you thought about the term important when picking this list. I think you said you picked them relatively quickly, right? So, I mean, was there a guiding thought behind important that you can think of that defined why you picked these three?
So, I mean, first off, I should say I know absolutely nothing about these records, really. I did no research, but I just wanted to go with, when someone asked me what are three important records to you, I just wanted to like browse through my collection, look through my records and CDs and tapes and my digital collection, and I just picked out three that felt right and three that I knew if I listen back to these, I'll find out why they're important to me.
Nice, yeah, for sure. That's great.
So yeah, I just did that. I did that.
Great.
So I don't know what one we want to get into first.
Is there one that makes sense for you, like either chronologically in your life, or?
Yeah, maybe we could do chronologically. So I definitely would have heard Appleseed Cast first.
Can you recall how that came about?
So I was thinking about this yesterday, and I definitely had and this is the same with a lot of Deep Elm Records, which is the record label that released Low Level Hour Volume 1, which is the Appleseed Cast album I chose. So I think I was given a burnt CD that had about half of Low Level Hour Volume 1 and most of Planes Mistaken for Stars self-titled EP.
Wow.
I think I was given that in high school, probably when I was about 15, 16. And so that would have been when I first heard, not all of, but some of this record.
Wow.
And the tracks that I had on that CD really stick out to me still on the album. But what I love about Low Level Owl, and it is a 2-part album, but I just chose the first volume here because, if it's a 2-part album that's over, I think it's almost 2 hours in total. So I just went for the first volume. Mm-hmm. And what sticks out to me is how important each track is as an individual piece, but then it also plays into the whole. So it's kind of ironic that I was given just a few of the tracks completely out of order. Obviously, I didn't get any of the interesting textural pieces or anything like that.
Wow, that's so interesting that you got it in that context.
yeah, quite a lot of music around that time was kind of in that context. Thursday is another band that I found through being handed a burnt CDR.
Were you giving burnt CDRs back as well at this time?
No, I didn't have the capabilities until many years later, and that's when I started like burning CDs of like my own music and things.
Right, gotcha. So, with the Appleseed cast, I mean, when you first were listening to them, I mean, where were you approaching them from? Like, what kind of things were you listening to?
I was definitely coming in. So it was definitely a couple of years after the record came out. Initially, I think it probably would have been around 2003, 2004, I think. And I was coming at it as a fan of. I had quite eclectic music taste, I suppose, growing up. I just kind of was a fan of what I had access to. So I had access to my parents' record collection. Which had a lot of, it had prog rock in it. It had like electronica artists. Aphex Twin was in there.
Wow.
Bjork was in there. Sade. Loads and loads of different music that just always stuck with me and I think kind of influenced my tastes as I went forward. So that's kind of how I was coming into it. I was definitely aware of emo and like the sort of the explosion that was happening at the time. With Thursday were one of my favorite bands at the time, and were probably like a real recent, like, 6 months before I heard Appleseed Cast, I'd just heard Thursday and they'd become my favorite band. Is probably the setting for this.
And was it one that you liked straight away then when you heard the whole record?
Yeah, absolutely. When I can't remember when I got the whole record. It probably was, I bought a lot of very cheap CDs from Deep Elm Records back in the day. They would do these crazy sales where they would send you like 20 random CDs with no cases for like $10 or something, or $15 or something ridiculous like that. So I got so many Deep Elm records that way, and that was almost certainly how I got Low Level Hour Volume 1 and 2. And Volume 1, yeah, I mean, as soon as I put it on, and as soon as I listened back to it the other day, I was just hooked straight into it. It really is quite an arresting record, and it has so many moving parts while being relatively simple and deceptively simple. It's quite a beautiful thing.
So it sounds like there was a few records floating around this time that sound like they fall in a similar sort of zone.
Yeah, definitely. This was kind of maybe the one that opened my mind up the most in terms of musical like eclecticism and freedom. And just focusing on texture and the other thing that I absolutely love this record for, and what I think it's like I said, I didn't do any research. I don't know what the critical I know this record's a classic and people like it, but the vocals are incredible in terms of how they work as their own instrument on this album, and how they, there's not verses and choruses, so to speak. There really are these movements in the vocals that just add and extend parts of the of the instrumentals. So it's a great way, and I think it kind of opened me up almost to that shoegaze way of thinking of sound and vocals, of sort of blurring things a little bit, and of using typically big, bold, like vocals, using those instead of as of at the forefront, using them as a supporting feature.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting actually, the vocals on this one, because I was huge into post rock, and a lot of the guitar tones and just as well the like melodic refrains feel so like nostalgically reminiscent of a lot of bands in that era at that time, right? But almost
definitely
always instrumental. So it's so weird to hear a voice amidst that and function so beautifully as well, because I think in my teen years I sort of convinced myself that they just didn't have vocalists because you couldn't, and also have guitars working so intricately, and I don't know, but yeah, it works really, really well amongst everything.
Yeah, there's a real sense of like the vocals when they come in, they mark something. There's this change in kind of adds this new textural element to the songs, and the songs that don't have vocals as well don't feel any less for having them, because they have so many of their own interesting textures and layers, and it really feels like this flowing album. And I know Deep Elm isn't renowned for being a great label. I'm sure Appleseed Cast absolutely hate them, but and I don't know what the deal is with splitting it across two albums. Obviously, it's almost 2 hours in length if you combine it all together, which is it is kind of a lot, especially for a label that was primarily dealing in CD back in the day.
Right.
But it really feels like it doesn't feel like, okay, we want to get out of a deal. We've got 2 albums left. Let's just split this thing up with instrumentals and extend this with like post rock parts and stuff. It feels like from the beginning it was intended to be this really interesting, at the time anyway, 2001 when it was released, this really unique kind of melting of post rock and emo and all the influences that Appleseed Cast came in with. Like their first record is such an obvious Mineral sort of homage. By the time they get to this record, it's incredible the journey that it's gone on.
You say that this one had like a particularly big impact in terms of where it took you, in terms of how like eclectic it is. You mentioned the kind of shoegaze instigation there as well. Where else did this record take you, like after discovering it? Where did you go?
So I definitely dug in more to the record label. I was always that kid that was like, I was interested in finding out what else was on record labels that I liked, or artists that are on record labels. I had lots of disappointments, of course.
Right, yeah,
the band that I like is like the one good band on this label. But there was loads of ways in which I found lots of my favourite music. So just through discovering Deep Elm Records, it opened me up to some of my favourite bands like Benton Falls and Selfish, and the older Appleseed Cast records. And then it also took me off into that world of, when I was a teenager anyway, that kind of blurry world between shoegaze and post-rock that I couldn't quite understand at the time, which now makes a lot more sense to me. But I was listening to a lot of Slowdive not long after this, definitely.
Right, yeah.
Slowdive, When the Sun Hits, I think is probably the most direct record that I could see as sort of a lineage of this for my discovery.
I also want to return to this burnt CD. Because Planes Mistaken for Stars are a big one for you as well, right? So that CD
definitely.
really really delivered. I mean,
Yeah, I also, before that, it's weird. I've got these. I've got so many things where I had these burn or like home recorded like tapes and CDs that were so influential. I also had another one that was had black metal on one side, a tape that had black metal on one side, and Aphex Twin on the other side. So that was really influential as well. That was around the same time.
oh wow, that's so good. I mean, do you think that any of your desire to amalgamate genres comes from just having all these styles in such close kinship like this?
I've never been someone who's become a fan of a genre as a whole. I've always just taken what I love from the bands that I love, and I think there's like a through line between the stuff that I kind of draw together, and I felt that way as well. Like years ago when I was creating more like diverse work with Cremation Lily, it still felt like Cremation Lily to me. There was no reason that it should be something else. And I think I definitely get that inspiration from not only the creative evolution of bands like Appleseed Cast, but also just that eclectic taste that I was taking in. And I think as well, at the time it was pre-internet. Well, it wasn't pre-internet. The internet was about, but it was pre-home internet for me.
Right.
And I was kind of just taking in what I had, and they kind of became my taste, really.
And do you have a favourite track on this one?
So I did try and think of a favourite track earlier. I definitely think Messenger is one that's I believe that's an instrumental track that I absolutely love, and then Signal at the end is this really, it influenced quite a lot. It fades into a field recording at the end, and that influenced the penultimate song on Dreams Drenched in Static a little bit. I realised, I don't know if it didn't directly influence it, but
That's so cool.
the ninth out of 10 songs on Dreams Drenched in Static does a very similar thing at the end of the climax. So there's pretty much a direct, it made an impact on me in some way.
Okay, Zen, let's go to your second important record then. So if we're going chronologically, what's that?
So I guess the next one would be Welcome the Plague Year, the self-titled album. And this is just like, for me, I would have received it. I definitely got the retail CD of it. So it was either around Christmas 2004 or Christmas 2005. It was probably Christmas 2005. I was sent a song from it. I can't remember exactly what track it is. I think it's Craft Messenger, right in the middle of the album, which is probably one of the most immediate tracks, which kind of makes sense why I was into it. So I was sent that track on MSN Messenger, and this was the same person. My friend Leighton, growing up, he was a bit older, and he kind of influenced me with sort of this stuff, screamo, and so he sent me bands like Ampere and Orchid, Rome's Dream, Reversal of Man, Off Minor, and Welcome the Plague Year. So to me, they all came into my life at the same time. They were all on kind of equal footing to me. So to me, Welcome the Plague Year, this album is like the greatest screamo album of all time that I very rarely hear anyone talk about. So I wanted to kind of bring a bit of attention to it because I think it's absolutely incredible.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing. So I'd not heard of them, and I don't know loads about screamo, to be honest, as well. I kind of skimmed it, but they released one record, right? And that was it. They seemed like a couple of splits and stuff, right?
Yeah, a couple of splits and this record, and I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah. I don't know how easy this is to articulate, but why is it the best screamo record in the world?
Well, It starts with feedback and a sample, so I'm fully interested from the very beginning.
Right.
I think so. There's two ways in which I think that it's just an incredible record. There's a personal significance to me in that I think that it was one of the first things that I heard where I was like, where the vocals felt like something that I could do and something that I could feel comfortable doing and could be like this cathartic release that I needed. Like it was like I'd been drawn to playing guitar, and I still play guitar and I still suck at it, and I was drawn to playing keyboard, and I still play keyboard. I'm not that much better at that either, but like vocals and screaming and the types of vocals that I was hearing in these bands felt like something that really connected with me, and it was definitely something that that inspired me to later be in heavy screamo bands. The other reason I think it's great is because the heavy parts are ultra heavy, super mournful. They're just full of vocals that are sometimes panned, sometimes overlapping each other in the center. It has these huge crushing moments, but the contrast on the album is just better than for me. It's just better than anyone else has managed to do in terms of screamo.
Right.
The swimmy, modulated, cleaner guitar parts are almost like, for me, definitely the most memorable on the record. And like a track like Humming to a Dead Song, for example, which has this like really swimmy modulated guitar that leads into this ultra heavy build up. It really has this memorable aspect to it because of the contrast and the dynamics of the album. It's not like a wall of sound that pummels you at all times. The contrast is really important to it, and that stuck with me as well.
Yeah, it feels like it reminds me of like Slint record or something. The dynamics are that vast, and the production isn't far off either.
No, yeah, it definitely has. Definitely, I can see how you can make that connection.
So how old were you when you discovered this one?
I think I would have been 16, 17, probably 16. And then I think when I was 17, I was in a screamo band, so it didn't take long.
Wow. And what's your relationship been like with this record since? Like, has it always stuck with you? Have you kind of ebbed and flowed with it?
No, it's always been if anyone asks me what my favourite screamo band is, or in general what some of my favourite heavy music is, this album will always be pretty high up there, I think. Like there's a run of tracks. I mean, if I have one criticism of the album, you could probably take off the final track, because it's, as the track title says, Improv 1, Take 1. It's kind of a 9-minute potential in studio improv. It's a good track in its own right, but I would probably take that off to make the album perfect. But the run of songs from, I mean, it's hard to choose, but the run of songs from like the end of Quiet Still Dead, which is the 4th track, into the 10th track is just this incredible up and down, left, right, this amazing ride that it takes you on. And it's just, a great run of tracks that I don't think has been beaten, really.
Does that narrative element of this record, do you think that informed how you thought about screamo as well? Yeah,
definitely. And this is a record that has those something that is a bit of a trope in screamo, the sort of like distorted samples of spoken word and protest, and but it really feels like it's like the selections were important to this record, and they're given their own space and their own time on the record, and I think that definitely, like, the aesthetics and the sound and the presentation of this definitely influenced what I was trying to create in screamo as well.
So it sounded like a lot of other records were coming in from a friend at this time. You mentioned MSN Messenger. I mean,
Yes.
are there other records from? We all did it. Like
So
such a big
many.
one for me.
Okay, well, so I used Kazaa like twice, and once I tried to download Thursday, and I actually got a song from a band called Hopes Fall,
Right.
who became a band that I actually really liked, and that's how I discovered them.
Wow.
And then I was also sent a lot of like, along with like heavy music, I was also getting really into like electronic and ambient music, kind of on my own at the same time. So I got a lot of like, I downloaded like Aphex Twin albums and Uncool Records and Boards of Canada and stuff like that, and I definitely sourced a sweet Boards of Canada ripped CD of whatever the newest record was at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I listened to an interview the other day. You talked about having like a really poor rip of a Boards of Canada record.
Yeah. Very low quality. It was probably like 128 kbps or something on burnt to a CDR. Really tinny, very tinny audio quality is what I remember.
Yeah, I don't know about you because you said you were 16, but it's not anything I just didn't hear it like that back then, right?
And I hadn't heard what the songs were meant to sound like. To me, that was
right. That's true.
to me, that was what they were meant to sound like, and also that warping of music as I was getting into it, I think definitely influenced some of the ways in which I process sound now. I am drawn to those lo-fi and those crackly textures.
And are there other? You said like a lot of screamo records were coming your way at this time too. I mean, were you into screamo much before you heard this record?
No, this was one of the early ones I heard. It was this, Off Minor, Reversal of Man, Orchid. Those are definite bands that I remember being sent to me around that time, and then we started a band shortly thereafter. It was kind of, someone was showing me these bands to get me into them so we could start a band together.
Was that right?
I think that's what it was in retrospect. We did very shortly thereafter start a band together, so I assume that's what it was.
That's so cool.
So yeah, it was a lot of that stuff. Orchid has always stuck with me. Ampere as well, which is the same guitarist. Like those bands kind of all came in at the same time. They were all on equal footing to me. A band like Off Minor or Welcome the Plague Gear, who aren't as maybe as remembered as Orchid or Jerome's Dream, to me they're just as important. And if not more so, because like this Welcome the Plague Gear album is top tier for me and still influences a lot of stuff that I do.
This is maybe a cruel question because you've made reference to the fact that there's such a seamless stretch in the middle of the record, but is there a track that protrudes for you as a favourite?
Oh, a favourite. That is a very good question. So I think Craft Messenger, as I was listening back to it, I actually listened to the record through 3 times today.
Oh wow!
I listened to it once and I was like, "Damn, that is so good." I want to listen to that again, but I didn't think about it at all. It just was on, and I was like, I need to sit and listen and actually actively listen to this now. So I think Craft Messenger is probably still my favourite track. I think it was one of the first that I heard, and it's probably one of the most immediate tracks on the record. It has just these big heavy riffs, has these fast dynamic changes. I'd say, yeah, Craft Messenger is probably one of my favourites. And if I could take a track off of it, I would take Improv 1, Take 1 off. Well, it is a nice track in its own right. I don't think I think Of the Bridges is a better closer to the record.
Okay, then let's go to your final important record. So if you could give me the name of it to begin with.
So it is Appropriation by Everyday Loneliness, I believe released in 2008, 2009. So this would have been one that I would not have heard upon release or close to release. It definitely was a couple of years after this that I started diving into the underground deep enough to find Everyday Loneliness. And for me, this was a choice based on kind of who heads up this project, because it is a solo project. It's the same person that is in kind of more well-known noise and experimental groups like Pedestrian Deposit. Has a project called Emaciator as well, which is one of mine, and also, like you say, one of our mutual friends, Dean Knifed Out of Existence, I believe one of their favourite noise projects as well. So,
right,
Everyday Loneliness is basically this really unique and interesting project that when I heard it, I had definitely heard things that were similar to it. I'd heard things like disintegration loops, and I'd heard the obvious ambient touchstones, Eno, and I dived into that world because I've been interested in electronic music for a while up to that point. But this was the first time that I'd heard something that felt so hands-on and tangible, like you could really feel the like cracks and the creaks within each loop, and it's just so imperfect and so it feels so minor.
Yeah,
it feels like a tape project, which is what it was originally. It's now available on Bandcamp and Spotify, but it was originally a tape release. And for me, that's kind of a glorious, hazy quality that I love, when something can be so specific and so singular, and can just be a moment in time. And here the title gives it away, Appropriation. I mean, I don't know the source of some of these loops or really any of them, but they're not original. They would have been taken from something else. But the way that Everyday Loneliness kind of stretches and chops these loops, turns them from what they originally were to something that has its completely own identity. And there's a real fingerprint of the maker on these tracks.
The choice of what to loop is so interesting. Like, I think this is the first one I put on of the stuff that you sent through. And
it was the first one I chose, actually.
Oh, was it? That's interesting.
It was just, I was thinking about tape work, and I was thinking, where does the way that I work with tape and the way that the sound of tape that I enjoy, I wonder where that comes from. And I was kind of backtracking a little bit, going through some of my tapes and going through some of my records, and this was one that stuck out to me.
That first track has got like that slide on the guitar, which sounds, when you first hear it, you're like, I don't know if I can hear that too many times.
Yeah.
And then
you hear it
sad.
You hear it for like 6 minutes, and it's just absolutely heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I mean,
wow.
the album is deeply sad. To me, it's incredibly isolated and very like I say, it's singular in its obsessive focus. It's tape loops, and to be honest, I don't even know if some of them are tape loops. They sound like they've been looped digitally, and there's not even been any cleaning up done on the start of the digital loop, so it clicks every time, which like, to me, that's just part of the charm of this. It feels like a product of like an emotion or a moment, as opposed to something that's been tinkered on and overdone and over processed. It really feels like a session, and these are just the loops that felt right, regardless of whether they're in key together, or regardless of whether they wash together in the most pleasing way. These are just the loops that make sense in this moment.
It felt like, I mean, the idea of tidying them up feels so at odds with the despondency of what's going on, right?
Yeah. I think it's and that influenced me a lot as well. And the reason I chose this one, not only was it because it's important in terms of the way that I like to hear tape, but it's also important, I think, in terms of like opening me up to this underground world that led to where I am now. You know, I've in 2011, probably the same year I heard this, I started a tape label, and was releasing music that was, you know, akin to this, and inspired by this, and adjacent to this. Shortly thereafter.
When you say it informed how you like to hear tape, I think you've touched on like why that is. Feels very hands-on, but yeah, what is it about? Wonder if we can drill into it. Like, what is it about this record that informs or displays how you like to hear tape?
So I think what I love about tape so much, what I love about this, is it's just so immediate. You know, you can record your own music to tape for the cost of it, to find an old shit tape deck and a couple of cheap tapes. You know, it's not. There's no gear requirement, really. There's no cost associated with it. It really is as simple as you know, grab a Walkman, grab a dictaphone, start recording. And the way that you can physically interact with tape, stretch it, pull it, scuff it, loop it, is something that I love about it, and one of the appeals to it, and is definitely shown on this record. Something that's on this record that is kind of like both a pet peeve and something that I really love is when you can hear a tape loop that has been, just to get nerdy for a second, when you can hear a tape loop that's been recorded after it's been made into a loop, basically.
Right.
So if you cut a tape loop from a long piece of recording and then loop it, will be a pretty seamless loop because there's no stop or start record point. Whereas if you record onto a loop that you've made and you just click, you know, stop and start on your dictaphone or on your tape deck, there'll be a hard stop there, and that is in every single track on this on this album. And it's like, I know what that feeling is, because sometimes you just have this idea for a loop and you don't want to have to go through the whole process of dubbing it. You just want to do it quick and dirty and just like get it out of your system, you know?
Yeah.
And that's why I love this album. It just feels like this freeing of these ideas and this freeing of this sort of singular obsession. And yeah, it definitely, I've been working on some ambient tape work again recently, and so many of my like tastes in ambient work, they come from the obvious sources, but they also really heavily come from this stuff, and the idea of using ambient music to portray bleakness and loneliness is really quite powerful. When up to that point, you know, I'd mostly heard Eno giving us music for airports.
Right, yeah, exactly. So we talked about with Appleseed Cast, that was a half a burnt CD. Welcome to Play Gear was MSN Messenger. You mentioned picking up on this one because it was adjacent to the projects by, you know, the person behind this one. So how were you coming into music? What was your main mode of discovery when you were getting into this one in, you know, 2011, 2012, I think you said?
Yeah, I think it probably, now I'm thinking about it, I lived in a shared house with my old bandmates in 2010, and that's definitely when I first started diving into a lot of this stuff. So I'm not sure I'm not sure who showed me this. It was definitely a self-discovery. This was the first one that I think I discovered myself. And I was coming into it having been in a screamo band since 2006. So, you know, we'd been going for a while and we had records out. We were a touring band. I had like projects that I was working on myself, like noise projects and clandestine black metal projects and all the sorts of things that you do when you're when you're living in a shared house with your friends that make music. So this one came to me during that period where I was just kind of like making my own music and really getting into just recording my own experiments. I remember not long after I heard this and discovered Everyday Loneliness as a project, I recorded some of the earliest Cremation Lily stuff that was quite influenced by this in terms of looping and in terms of atmosphere and texture.
Do you think your relationship with tape or your attraction to tape has changed at all since those early experiments? Like, do you think about it differently? Are you drawn to different parts of it?
Yeah, I again, this is something I was thinking about recently. So tape has changed a lot, since I started using it. The reason I was using it literally is it was so cheap compared to anything else, and you could physically interact with it. That's what I've always loved about it. You can pull tape out, you can bake it in the sun, you can cut it up and resplice it back together. That's always been that physical aspect, and being able to hear that physical damage to the tape or that physical manipulation to the tape has always been something that's kept me coming back to cassette. Now that it's kind of this world of like Instagram boutique and like 4 tracks are on eBay for 700 quid or something, it does lose some of its like unwanted, discarded appeal to me. But I'm not in those worlds, and I'm just kind of whittling away with some of the same old crappy tape loops that I've been using for years, and the same modified players that the engine doesn't work very well, and it stutters and stops half the time, and I'm in this world where I'm kind of creating my own work with knowledge of what's happening outside. But Cremation Lily is always, and when I work on Cremation Lily, I've always tried to keep it fairly self-reflective and something that kind of reflects who I am and what I'm going through as a person at the time. So whatever I'm listening to definitely has an impact. And I think all 3 of these albums, in terms of the music that I made going forward and the music that I'm still making, they all had a pretty huge impact on me.
Awesome. Well, Zen, thank you so much for talking about all of them and your record as well. It's been great. I've had a really good time with these, and I know I'll listen to them again after this. Awesome. And have a renewed listening experience. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time.
And to everyone listening, see you next time. Goodbye.